All right, thanks, Glenn. Thanks for having me, and really honored to be a part of this group. I started my finance career in 2008. Before that, I worked at EMC and also in sales capacities. Um, I've worked in investment banking as well as on the buy side for a private equity firm called Audax, based here in Boston. But then also, I've done some work with G2, which Glenn sold to Mission, and a couple of other strategic buyers. So I've done work on the buy side as well as the sell side. But the most important thing is I met Glenn in 2017 when I helped him sell G2, and that was the beginning of Main Sheet. So for my polling question, I think it's 1 through 6, or how many of you have a plan for exiting your business eventually? So you either have zero plan whatsoever, or you have a very detailed plan, but maybe you're here to sort of fill in a couple of gaps. But everyone's usually falls in somewhere along that spectrum of having a plan to exit your business.
All right, votes are coming in. About 50% of you have responded.
And Glenn, if I use any acronyms, feel free to stop me.
All right, you know I will.
It goes for anybody.
All right, just waiting for a few more folks. All right, last call on the poll, ending the poll.
So it looks like there's a bell curve here where most have just started to put a plan together, or they're on either side of that. A few of you have a very detailed plan, which is good. So hopefully we've filled in some gaps for you and can be helpful. This sounds about like most folks who have, even if you have a very detailed plan in place, make sure you do have a good deal attorney, whether you work with someone like myself or someone else. Make sure it's a reputable firm, and just have a plan. And you want to talk to Cal as early as possible is the most important thing, as well as Glenn. And then Mindy and I can help you later on. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey here. This is Selling Your Business 101. It's not meant to be every specific step you'll take in selling a business, but the idea is most deals follow a certain progression. I've seen deals take 9 months. I've seen them take much longer, for a lot of reasons. But they usually follow a certain pattern. You want to have a specific process to follow. Your buyers will see that you're professional in what you're doing, and they know how to react to your process, and they know when they need to submit their LOI and where they are in that timeline. So the first step is prepping for sale. So you want to work with someone like Calvin. Hopefully you hire Calvin. You want to gather your financials. You're going to write a teaser. So a teaser could be 1 or 2 pages, and it's essentially exactly what it sounds like. It's basically getting the attention of the potential buyers. You might put the name of your company on the teaser. You might have a code name like Project Apollo or Project, Icarus or something. Or you might want to put your financials on there. You might not. It really depends on your comfort level. I always tell people put as much on the teaser as possible, because you're really going to go to market hopefully once, and you want to unearth as many interested parties as possible. You're going to assemble a buyers list, and the buyers list should have strategic buyers in your industry. So a strategic is, like in Glenn's case, would be other managed service providers in his industry. Also, you want financial buyers on that list, private equity firms, growth equity, and they may have companies that they've bought in your industry. They might be strategic buyers themselves, or they may not. If they don't, they might be looking at you as a platform. So that would be their first acquisition in that industry. And then they might layer in tuck-in acquisitions underneath that. Feel free to jump in if that's not clear, Glenn. And then you want to reach out to your network. So if you or I are cold calling people in your industry for the first time, it's usually a red flag. You should know at least some of those folks, whether you meet them at conferences or they know you, they're competitors. There's co-opetition between you and them, but you want to reach out to your network as soon as possible. So you don't want that to be the first time that they've ever heard from you. Like the question earlier about your brand, that's when brand can be really helpful. If they've never heard of your company before, that's not gonna help. A SIM, CIM, confidential information memorandum, is basically the book. So you could write a SIM. You don't have to. You can put all that information that basically is in the SIM in a data room. But the SIM is essentially, they get the teaser, they sign an NDA, they say, I want to learn some more. You send them the SIM, and it's basically all they need to know to get excited about the company in one document.
So Matt, just on that one, in the book Art of Your Selling Your Business, it explains the different types of buyers in much more detail. But at a high level, the two types of buyers that everybody kind of runs into are financial buyers, and then Matt mentioned strategic buyers. In a nutshell, a financial buyer is buying your profits and is doing math homework on this plus this times this equals that. Usually private equity. And then a strategic is another big company that really wants your shiny new toy because they can plug it into their empire. And they tend to overpay or pay a premium because they're not really just doing the math. You have something that they could sell to their 100,000 or 1,000,000 clients already, and they're willing to pay a little bit more.
Yeah. And there's a question here just that came in. Was a question was what's the smallest deal a private equity firm like Great Hill Partners would do? Usually it depends. So when Glenn sold to Great Hill, they had a fund of a certain size. Their next fund size, they're getting bigger. They're doing bigger and bigger deals. The quick answer to that is if it's a platform, they might buy a company that's say 3 to 15 million of EBITDA, but they could do these tuck-in acquisitions. So the tuck-ins could be really small. When I worked for the PE firm, the average tuck-in we did was 2 million of EBITDA, and the platforms were 100 million, $200 million companies. So they'll go small, especially if that tuck-in acquisition is very strategic, gets them into a new market, gets them into a new geography. They'll do small deals, but usually only the smaller deals are because they already own a platform investment. Some of the pitfalls in this stage, sort of prepping for sale, you want to make sure that your team is all on the same page. So if there are any issues within the team, one person might want to sell, one person might not want to sell. The structure of the business. So perhaps like Cal mentioned earlier with stock, there's been a promise to the employee about stock options. Well, you really want to get those things hammered out before you go down this road. And you also might not want to tell too many people in your company that you're selling. It sounds a little dishonest, but worst thing that can happen is half your team quits during the process, right? So tell who you need to tell because you might need information, but I would limit the number of people in your company that know you're selling. So the next stage, I call it outreach. That's basically getting to them by any means necessary. So that could be going to a conference, and in Glenn's case, we went to reInvent, which is the big AWS conference. I went from booth to booth, handing out my business card to people. I cold called, I emailed. It's really trying to find everybody under the sun who might want to take a look at that teaser. And that could be a couple hundred strategic buyers. I have a list of 500 private equity firms that I send deals to. So it's pretty comprehensive. The pegs that I mentioned on here, those are private equity groups that have investments or focus in that area. So you might look at a private equity firm's website and you'll see they invest in technology, they invest in healthcare. Well, you might not know that they just hired somebody, they're about to get into financial services, or they're about to get into distribution, or they've done some niche manufacturing. So I always err on the side of sending teasers to more potential buyers rather than less, just in case, because you never know. Family offices, they're very active nowadays. So you might get somebody from the Goya family and they have a family office, and guess what? They're making investments in food companies because who knows more about food than the Goya family? So their family office now, because they have this niche and proprietary information on that industry, they could be a formidable investor out of their family office. You want to make sure that this outreach is comprehensive. You want to make sure that financial buyers are included. A lot of times people think, well, I know all the buyers in my industry already. It's going to be one of these 10. And then they're pleasantly surprised when they see another 20 emerge. Be ready to pause. So when COVID hit back in February, I told all my clients, let's take a break. I said, don't pay me for the next few months. Let's figure this out together. That was smart. I mean, if you're really, you're not timing it right. If you look like you're a what's called a distress sale, or a fire sale is the term people use oftentimes. You want to make sure you're timing it right, and that timing could be not sending your teaser on December 25th when everybody's trying to get deals done. It could be not sending your teaser right as COVID hits and no one's in the office to even talk about your deal. The next step is actually picking a buyer. So you're going to have multiple, in a perfect scenario, you're going to have multiple LOIs. An LOI is a letter of intent. It's an actual letter that they send you. It could be 2 pages, 4 pages long. It might show the price they're willing to pay. It might show a range. It's going to have some deal terms. It's going to talk a little bit about what they plan to do with the company. It's a little bit of an advertisement for why they're a good horse to pick. You then negotiate back and forth each LOI, and you pick one. Once you've picked one and sign it, you've gone into exclusivity. During exclusivity, that means you cannot talk to other potential buyers. So when Glenn was talking to Great Hill about buying his company, all the other bidders that were in that process, we couldn't talk to the others. Now, if Great Hill had decided, you know what, we don't want to buy it, we had to wait 15 days, and then you could go back out to the other buyers. But it's not ideal. They call that, busted process. One of the things you want to think about, some of the pitfalls in picking a buyer, are the culture. If there's going to be a culture clash between the buyer and the seller, are the strategies aligned? As a seller, are you open to the new ideas of the buyer? Because once you've sold your company, you really aren't in control anymore. So are you open to these ideas? Is it going to be a good fit? And then oftentimes people say to me, Matt, I really don't want to be bought by that company right there. I don't like those people, or I don't like that company right there. Don't remove them from the process too soon. They could drive the price up in the auction. They could double, triple the price of the company. There's a term called stalking horse bidder. And the idea behind that is that you get a bid and you use that and you shop it around. You don't want to, that's not appreciated by the buyers. If everybody's lined up and you get LOIs all at the same time, you negotiate all of them at the same time and then pick one. It's different than the stalking horse bidder, where someone comes in and then you shop that deal around. That's not appreciated by the buyer universe. Next step is due diligence and close. So once you've signed the LOI, you're in due diligence, you're exclusive. I've seen due diligence last a couple of weeks. I've seen it last months. It's really dependent on the comfort level of the buyer, the complexity of the business. They might bring in a third-party due diligence provider to go through the books and put their stamp of approval on the business as well. That could cost $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 just to do that. At that time, you're negotiating purchase and sale, stock, the actual documents. It could be employment agreements. It could be anything that you're gonna looking at contracts and what happens to those contracts under the new ownership. You're looking through all those documents. You want to make sure you have a good deal attorney. So sometimes you'll see business owner, they have their cousin who's a lawyer. They've done a great job. They've known the business forever. The cousin attorney has never done a deal before. So you want to make sure you have, and you might need 2 law firms in that case, but you're going to want to make sure you have someone who comes in who's done a deal before, because there's so much that can happen. And there's so many pitfalls. So at that point in the game, usually emotion is running high. I tell my clients that I'm usually a therapist at that point for the last few weeks, just making sure that things don't run off the rails.
I can attest to that.
But you want to keep emotion in check as best you can. You want to make sure that there's a good cadence, momentum to due diligence. You want to maybe have daily or calls multiple times per week. You don't want to let things go too long, and you move to close. Go to the next slide. So this is not meant to be comprehensive, but this was really helpful when I sit down with people and I talk about valuation. The bell curve is meant to think about your particular industry. Most companies in your industry will sell within a sort of standard deviation from the mean within your bell curve. Now, there are certain things, certain detractors that'll decrease the value of your business. So the question earlier about brand, maybe your brand is a regional brand, right? And the buyer happens to be in California. Do they really care a lot about your brand? They might say, you know what, we need a brand in the Northeast. Or they might say, you know what, we really don't care about that brand. We're not gonna give it a lot of value. So the brand it might not be a detractor, that could be neutral. But say you have customer concentration, meaning like Glenn was talking earlier about, I think it was the Switzerland structure. If you have one customer that's 80% of your business, that's high concentration. Say you have low EBITDA margin, going to detract from your value. Say you have these unicorns that Glenn mentioned earlier. There's a scarcity of unicorns in your industry to go higher to grow your business. That could be a detractor. On the other hand, you have these enhancers that could also get you to knock out valuation. So it's important to think about the things in your business that could be detractors and that could be enhancers. And oftentimes people say to me, Matt, that company over there sold for 50 million. Am I going to sell for 50 million? And the answer is, well, you might, but don't get hung up on that, because they might have had triple your revenue. They might have had some IP that had huge barriers to entry. They might have hired all of the unicorns in your space. And it's really hard to compare your business to someone else's. We'll do the best we can. But usually you don't know exactly why that company got that much money for their business. So I always caution people trying to compare themselves to other deals. But this is just an exercise where you can think about your detractors and your enhancers yourself.
And this page is actually in the workbook too, so you can kind of reflect on this a little bit longer.
And you could add 30 bullets on either side of this to each side. This is just meant to get you thinking about what you can do to increase the value of your own business.
Cool. Well, thank you, Matt. We'll now get open up for questions and answers for Matt. While the questions are coming in, I just wanted to comment on working with someone like Matt. He had mentioned deal lawyers and what have you. I learned early on in the process, there's a number of different ways you can go about selling your business. And one of those different approaches is working with an attorney that can do all this, contractual, odds and ends. But the owner themselves does all the negotiating. That is an option, to sell the business yourself, market yourself, and do all the talking, and then have a strong lawyer do the paperwork. But that lawyer isn't going to negotiate for you. And I think this is actually advice that Calvin gave me early on. And I knew myself, and I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I get frustrated. And, I knew that I needed somebody in between me and the buyers, because as Calvin cautioned me, I didn't want to accidentally piss off my new boss in the process. It's like you go through that, tensions get high, and then, the deal gets done, and then there was all that drama, and now you've got a new boss, and they're not very happy with your previous behavior. That could be a bad situation. So to each their own on the scenario they want to go down. But that's why I decided to work with someone like Matt.
I actually gave the advice the other day to a client to actually walk away from a deal, and the knowing full well that the buyer was probably going to come back a couple of weeks later, and you could see my client is shaking, like physically shaking, just thinking about the idea of having to do that themselves. And so, having those tough discussions, while I'm not emotional about it, I care about my clients, but it's easy in theory, but when you have to actually have those difficult discussions, it's nice to have somebody else as a buffer.
Especially when that someone else is telling you your baby is ugly for some reason, and that reason is I don't want to pay you the money you thought you were going to get. That can be a tough one. We got a question that came in here. Matt, can you speak to negotiating buying out or slash buying out a partner?
Sure. So I think a lot of that really depends on expectations. So sometimes you have to do a valuation. Like there are companies that actually do valuations, and doing that, then it's easy if you both agree to that valuation, and that person, you've already agreed on that person's percentage ownership of the business. Um, Obviously it depends on who does the valuation, because if you do the valuation, your partner might think, well, they did a low valuation, so when you buy me out, the percentage is worth less. How about I do my own valuation, and therefore the value will be higher. I'll coach them to be a higher number. So it's an art, but happy to take that one offline too if you want.
Plus, the valuation of a partner buyout is a little different than the valuation when you're selling 100% of a business. And there's typically a discount, which can become a stumbling block if the partner is expecting a fully priced deal, not a discounted minority buyout price.
Yeah, good point.
Yes, buying half of a company is not worth as much as buying all of a company.
Right.
Cool. Any more questions for Matt?
Feel free to email me. That's my cell phone number. Call me anytime.
I do it all the time. He's a good man. He answers.